Hey everyone, Skateness Johnson here from the Machine Knitting Beginner Circle group, and today I want to talk to you guys about knitting machine carriages. I've got carriages for a variety of my machines laid out here on this table, and I'm really focusing this video on our very new knitters who are unfamiliar with the workings of their knitting machine and the carriages especially. So this video is for you. I have brother knitting machines on one side, and I have our silvery type knitting machines on this side. I personally have a studio machine, standard and a bulky. And when I say studio, I'll be talking about any silvery type machines. Those include Knitmaster, Empisal, the Studios, the Singers, and a few others. All right, let's talk about standard gauge machines and their carriages. This is a brother, as I mentioned. This is the studio. They both support the standard gauge machines, which are 4.5 millimeter spacing of needles. There are some differences between the two carriages. The first one is really striking. As you can see here, the brother machines have push buttons, and the push buttons engage the tuck, multicolor knitting, lace knitting, intarsia, and part, which is also slip. On this carriage, I have normal knitting lever. I can put it into hold position. That means that if I pull all my needles out on the bed towards me, I can then pass this carriage right across those needles without knitting them. That's called the hold position. But I do have to put this carriage on H for hold. If I'm tucking, making a tuck stitch, or lace, or using more than one color yarn, I can push in these buttons to achieve that. If I want to disable that and go back to regular stockinette knitting, I press that button and these buttons slide out. Now my buttons stick a little bit and I have oiled them, so that should have just popped right out. But as you can see, it comes out a little bit slowly because it's still a little sticky. That's one of the problems with the brother carriages, I would say, is that sometimes when you get one of these machines, and of course they're all old, they're not being made anymore, you can get buttons that stick. So mine, I'm still working through it. This is fairly new to me machine. I've had it for about 3 weeks now, and I'm still trying to get these buttons to unstick and pop back out as they should quickly. But anyway, let's move over to the studio. Now, on the studio machine, you can see that I don't have a hold lever like I have on the brother. What I have in order to put this machine or this carriage in hold position is I have these Russell levers here. So in order to go from regular stockinette, meaning knitting the needles, to not knitting needles in hold, I have to pull these levers out. And they work for each side. So I can have the left side knitting the needles as it goes to the left, and the right side not knitting needles in hold. Or any variety of that. I can reverse it. I can have both sides not knitting needles in hold. It's up to you. Now, if I want to tuck on a studio machine, I've got this lever here that slides from tuck. I go to slip. I can go to regular stockinette stitching. I can go to punch lace and fair isle. There is no setting on this carriage for intarsia. Now, the intarsia setting on this carriage is specific to the type of machine that this carriage goes to. This is an electronic knitting machine carriage, and it's from my brother 950. And so basically this has built-in intarsia, but a lot of other brother machines do not. Here's my bulky or chunky 260, and this is a Knit King. Knit King is also the equivalent of brother. I believe in Europe it was called Knit King, and in the States it was brother. Basically same company. So my chunky / bulky machine, this 260, does not have intarsia. As you can see, it's just normal knitting or hold. So these are the functions with this carriage. One of the things that I really love about the studio machines is if I decide I want to bring this carriage from one side of the bed to the other, but I don't want to knit anything, and I don't want to pull all of my needles out into hold in order to pass the carriage, I can use this release lever and pop that carriage up. And when the carriage pops up, it's basically going to bypass all of those needles. It's not going to disturb them at all. The carriage pops up high enough where all the needles can pass by underneath without disrupting anything. The entire mechanism for knitting pops up in the air so nothing gets disrupted when you move the carriage over. Great system, and I use it a lot because I make a lot of mistakes. You can see that we have tuck brushes here. That's to engage, that's to disengage on the Brother machine. The system is not as easy on the Studio. This has sort of a spring locking mechanism here on the side to do the same thing. But I find that it doesn't always catch, and it's a little funky, and it also bumps into this little weaving antenna here. So I like it better on the Brother because it just flips up. And again, this is standard. But if you take a look at my chunky / bulky Brother machine, these brushes come separate. And I actually have to sit them down here and screw them in when I want to use them. So that's a little less convenient than if you look at the Studio, where the brushes are built in just like on the Brother machine. So here I can flip them down when I need them, or flip them up when I don't. Kind of wish the Brother 260 had that type of system, as opposed to screwing them on when I need them and unscrewing them when I don't. With the Studio and this bulky, chunky carriage, you can see I have my functions of tuck, slip, stockinette, punch lace, and knit in, which is the fair isle. And I also have the release here to pop the carriage up when I want to bypass the needles. I also have hold position from these levers, Russell levers in the front. And I do have some side levers. The side levers help to activate the drums that these machines use. And I'll show you on a standard machine. Here's the side levers here for the Studio. And on the standard carriage, you can see the drums. These are pattern drums. And what they do is, if I'm using a punch card on my machine, the pattern gets locked into these drums. Okay, so let's look at labeling. Just a quick tip, when I got this Studio, this was for my 360, when I got my Studio 360 machine, it had labels. Someone had taken the time to label all the buttons, from the weaving knob, okay, which is the knob here that controls these weaving brushes, to weaving yarn holders, that would be this, Russell front levers or levers, those are here for hold position, the tuck, the slip, the punch lace, the fair isle, this is called your stitch dial, your release lever, all the way up here to the side levers. All of those were labeled. And it's a great idea to label them because as you're reading through your manual, they'll talk about these different parts of the carriage or machine, and unless you label them or commit them to memory, you're going to have a difficult time. So, my recommendation, get some maybe masking tape or painter's tape, something that can come off very easily. If you want to pull it off later, I just left mine on, and label the parts of your machine, just to make it easy for you. Now, I have not done that on my Brother because when I started working on knitting machines, Brother was the first type of machine that I had, so I'm very familiar with the functions of the Brother machine, but I left everything alone in the Studio as I familiarized myself with that. Alright, so let's look at these openings for the yarn guides. Flips open on Brother, you have your A, yarn goes in there, lock it, B, slide the yarn in here. On the Studio, pretty similar. you have 1 and 2 instead of A and B. On 1, yarn goes in here, flip it close. On 2, yarn slips in there. Very similar system. Same thing for the chunky / bulky machines. And if you look over here, pretty similar on the chunky / bulky brother machine. Now, this is where it really gets interesting for me. If you look at a brother machine, brother machines don't have the same bar in the back that the studio singer machines have. And the bar that I'm talking about is right up under here. Let me flip this over for you. This bar, sort of a rounded, this curved bar that slides and locks onto the metal rod, that bar in the back on your knitting machine. So there's a round bar on the knitting machine that you have to slide this carriage onto and it locks in place. Now that's good and that's bad. It's excellent on my river because I know that the river carriage won't just fall off. Not so great, in my opinion, on the flatbed knitting machine because I can't just lift this carriage up from any point on the bed. I have to slide it all the way across, which is why you have this release lever so that you can move it. And then I have to slide it completely off the bed to remove it because it locks in place. On the brother machine, you don't have the locking mechanism and in terms of a bar that the carriage slides on. What you do have is this. So this knob has your normal knitting, then it has your decorative knitting, KC1, KC2. The way I like to describe these are if you are doing multicolor knitting, Fair Isle and Target kind of thing. And then the CR is your carriage lock or carriage release. So basically, when you want to lift this carriage off the knitting machine, you turn it to carriage release, and I'll show you what happens underneath. You may not be able to see that too well. Let me lift it up. And I'm doing this all with one hand because I'm holding my phone with the other. But basically, let's see if I can lean this against myself. Okay, so carriage release. When I do carriage release, oops, that wasn't good. Let me put this over here on the green so you can see before I break my carriage. Okay, so carriage release, you see that brown bar moving in and out? When I have it off of carriage release, anywhere from here to here in the dark area, this bar is out and it locks into the needle bed. So you can't just lift the carriage up off the machine. But when I slide this over to carriage release, that bar separates from the needle bed, and now I can just pick up my carriage and lift it up off the needle bed from any position, from anywhere. As long as the needles aren't stuck underneath, I can just pick it up and move it. So that's one of the benefits, I would say, of the brother carriage over the studio. However, again, the studio does have a nice benefit where you do have this carriage release. So if you need to move that carriage quickly from one side to the other, just lift it up and slide it across. It will not disturb the needles at all. Same thing on the chunky, bulky machine. Carriage release. I'm sorry, not carriage release. This makes it pop up. It is a release of sorts. And here you have to turn the dial, carriage release. Now, the release here again does not allow you to just pick up the carriage. What it does is it allows you to slide the carriage across the bed, but because you still have this circular bar there, right here, which locks onto the rail, you can't just lift the carriage up. I do find that the silvery type machines are a lot smoother and a lot easier to push than the brother carriages. Well, silvery type machine carriages are a lot smoother, lighter to push, in my opinion, than the brother. And I believe that one of the reasons is, especially with the chunky, bulky machines, they have rollers. These little rollers here that slide along the needle bed and just give it a nice smooth feel when you're working that carriage back and forth during your knitting. You don't have that with the brother machines. Also with the brother machines have a metal, a ribbon type mechanism that the carriage locks onto. So when you slide that carriage across, you're actually pulling that metal ribbon back and forth, up and down the carriage. So you have the added restriction of that. You don't have that with the Studio Singer carriages or Studio Singer machines, because basically your drums are doing all the work. All right, so those are the carriages and their mechanisms. As you can see, they all have a sinker plate release with the knobs that you turn. Functions pretty much the same way. Now let's take a look at our lace carriages. Now, on a brother machine, this is the lace carriage. You can do normal lace or you can do fine lace. Those are the settings right here. This is what it looks like underneath. Very simple, very basic. The way the lace carriage operates on the brother machine is that your punch card, or when you select the needles yourself, you're selecting needles that you would like to have the stitch transferred from or to. And then the lace carriage works its way across, you work it across, and it pops off the stitches from one needle to the next. And that creates this holes or spacing in your knitting for the lace. Works really well, and only works with standard gauge knitting machines. You can't do it with the bulky or chunky because the needles are just too thick. They don't bend enough to pop those stitches off. So the lace carriage will bend needles and the stitches will pop off. That's the way it works with the standard. Now with the Studio Silvery type machines, I happen to have an LC2 carriage. Now this particular lace carriage, the way this functions is, not only does it transfer stitches from one needle to the next to create those lace openings like the brother lace carriage does, but it also knits. So normally when you're working with a brother machine, you have to have your lace carriage on one side and you have your main carriage on the other side, and you slide your main carriage over and back to select the needles, and then you slide your lace carriage over and back to transfer the needles, and then you slide your regular carriage back and forth to knit those needles, and then you slide this back and forth. And so that's the way you work. You work with two carriages at a time. With my LC2 lace carriage, you transfer the stitch and knit the stitch all in one pass. So basically, then once the needles are selected, this carriage will knit across, transfer, and knit at the same time. So there is no two carriage system, transfer this one and then knit over it. It's all done in one pass with the LC2. And I believe it's one pass, but it's all done one direction. That's the beauty of this. These are kind of pricey, but when I did get my Studio standard gauge machine, it came with this. It also came with an intarsia carriage, and I do have, I think, a transfer carriage that came with my brother machine. So there are a few other specific carriages that come with some of these machines, but these carriages that we're talking about today are the ones that are most widely used. Again, this has the drums to record the patterning, which also selects the needles, it knits the stitches, and it transfers the stitches. So it can pretty much do everything. Big fan of the Studio brand for this reason. Okay, so that is pretty much it that I wanted to discuss today about the carriages. You do know, brother machine, this is going to be for your row counter. That's a tripper right there, trip that row counter. This is more for if you're using a knit leader. Same thing, your trippers. These can be moved. They can be lifted up and turned to the side if you don't want to engage them. Same thing here. If I don't want to engage the row counter, I can lift it up, turn it sideways. That's on the bulky. This side here, same thing. And here you have this, which is a tripper as well. So that is pretty much it for carriages. If you have any questions, feel free to post under the video, and myself or one of the other admins or anyone else who's knowledgeable will answer those questions for you. Hope you enjoyed the video. Happy knitting!